Articles of Confederation were the first of two blueprints for the United States government. Although the Articles had serious weaknesses, government under the Articles should be credited for some important achievements. What are the major defects of the Articles, and why did they impede the development of a national government? And with that, if you would also consider, what were the major achievements of government under the Articles of Confederation, and in what ways, if any, are the weaknesses of the Articles comparable to the weaknesses of the United Nations and the European Union?
Who would like to start?
Despite being nicknamed a firm league of friendship, the Articles of Confederation created a weak central government. Article 2 demonstrated this by providing each state retains its sovereignty, freedom, and independence. Because sovereignty implies independence, states dismissed the idea of ceding much power to the central government as it would take away from their own. Ironically, the Articles were named the Articles of Confederation and Perpetual Union, even though they lacked unity.
With little coercive authority in the central government, the Articles were unlikely to succeed. Publius criticized the central government's lack of power when he said in Federalist 15, the United States has an indefinite discretion to make requisitions for men and money, but no authority to raise either. Without the power to tax, it was difficult to finance effective government activities or pay back the $400 million Revolutionary War debt.
Additionally, the Articles lacked an executive branch, so the central government couldn't enforce its own laws. In Federalist 15, Publius expressed his concern about this, writing, "The resolutions or commands which pretend to be laws will amount to nothing more than advice." Moreover, the supermajority of the United States needed to pass laws, and the unanimous vote required to amend the Articles created excessive inefficiency. These defects impeded development of a national government.
Yet the U.S. under the Articles had some successes. Overall, the Articles merged 13 separate sovereign states into a union and maintained individual rights, at least for white men. Together, the colonies measured over 1,300 miles long. The government's ability to unite such a large area in a day of limited technology was one of its greatest achievements.
Moreover, the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, created by the Confederation Congress, allowed for new states to enter the Union on the same footing as older states, allowing for America's physical, unified growth. The Northwest Ordinance also protected residents of these new states from religious persecution and granted them habeas corpus. Its forbiddance of slavery in these new states and of violence against Native Americans, except in cases of war declared by Congress, meant that the Northwest Ordinance was even surer to the Declaration of Independence than America's eventual Constitution, based on its recognition of human dignity.
Furthermore, Article 3 of the Articles of Confederation empowered the central government to raise a common army. Because the Continental Congress could not mandate states to contribute to war funding, it relied heavily on borrowing from other nations. Without support from countries like France, America's national military would have been depleted of essential resources. However, it was with this military that America gained its independence from Britain.
Today, the European Union functions as a modern confederacy, reflecting the structural weaknesses of the Articles. First, just like the Articles, the EU lacks the ability to tax European citizens directly. The EU admits to European citizens. The amount of tax you pay is decided by your national government, not the EU. This inability to tax was one of the reasons the EU lacked the financial ability to pull Greece out of an ongoing debt crisis. In fact, similar to the Articles, where states could disregard the central government's authority, the UK recently refused to contribute money to the Greek bailout, making the plan harder to complete.
While it does mirror some of the failures of the Article, the EU did learn from these historical mistakes. For instance, the EU has an executive branch in the European Commission and a judicial branch with powers of judicial review in the form of the European Court of Justice. The court recently flexed this power in a November 7th ruling, which mandated that homosexuals may be granted asylum or protection from persecution in the EU.
These branches were not present in the Articles. Moreover, the EU has strengthened its coercive authority over time, unlike the Articles, through treaties like the Treaty of Lisbon, that fortified European Parliament and replaced what was a loose-knit European community with a union that now adheres to the EU's binding charter of fundamental rights. This means the EU has more power than did the national government under the Articles, which gives Europeans hope for greater success. We are now ready for your questions.
Thank you. Matt, do you want to start with the question?
Sure. I would like to ask you all, what problems arose because Congress under the Articles did not have the power to levy and collect taxes or to raise money?
So we see it in the Articles. Under the Articles, they didn't have the power as stated, but they did have a central treasury, but that was based on, that was collected from each state based on the value of the land in each state. And so their inability to force states to contribute money to the central treasury is a great deal in their, caused a great lack of funding for their ability to pay back debts as their war debt, because they borrowed a lot of money from other countries such as France and Spain.
Also, in Anti-Federalist Papers 3 and 4, the founders criticize the lack of authority to create a common army, and this was a major concern as there was many potential great powers around them, and there was a similar theme as Benjamin Franklin said in 1803, we will either hang together or we will hang separately, so there was a sense of urgency that they could not create this common army for a potential defense around them.
And in Articles 22, Publius also addressed the fact that America's national, or its common army was very weak. It mentioned the fact that troops were always fluctuating in number, and it meant that foreign threats were an ongoing issue.
In your opening, you all referred to the lack of an executive post. And what problems did that create?
So the lack of an executive, the purpose of an executive branch is to enforce laws, and Publius stated in Federalist 21 that the lack of executive branch means that the laws made are simply just laws. There's no ability for the central government to enforce them and make sure that the states are following them.
And as a follow-up on that, also the lack of a judiciary.
How the judiciary created, the lack of it created problems?
Yes. So again, we see in each state that the enforcement, not the enforcement, the interpretation of laws is up to the states, as is what the judiciary does. And so with laws being made, states can interpret them in a way that is pleasing to them. And this is also explained in Federalist 21 and 47 about how this lack created problems between the states as the laws were being interpreted differently.
And also, to quote James Madison in Federalist 51, if men were angels, there would be no need for government, and if angels were to govern men, there would be no need for internal or external controls over the government. So supplying both an executive and a judiciary branch provides not only separation of power that was needed, but also the checks and balances.
Thank you. Under what circumstances, if any, can distrust of government serve useful purposes?
Distrust of government as in citizens not trusting the government?
Right.
Okay. And so the distrust of government it often creates speculation within the government. So this allows citizens to be making sure that their representatives are properly representing them. And this speculation is what led for the founders to call the Philadelphia Convention and change the ineffective articles into the longest written standing constitution that is now the American Constitution.
Currently, there's a lot of distrust going on with the NSA surveillance over people, and even though they are invading rights, which is debatably good or bad, they are also claiming that they're looking out for possible terrorist attacks or foreign invasions, so they're ultimately looking out for us even though they are intruding on our civil liberties.
So what I think I hear you say is distrust of government to a certain extent is a healthy situation. Would you agree with that, Zira?
Yes.
What problems arose because Congress under the Articles did not have the power to levy and collect taxes?
Similarly to what we said before, they didn't have the ability to, as Emily and Sarah had said, raise money to have their own standing army and raise money to fund federal initiatives and things that they wanted to do. For example, the desire to pay back their debts or create new laws or organizations. That ability wasn't there because they didn't have funding, they didn't have money.
Is there anything else you would like to offer today?
About anything.
Yes, you have like 30 seconds left.
The UN is also similar to the Articles of Confederation. It has a lot of weaknesses. For example, the UN, as former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan said, the UN is the only fire brigade in the world that has to wait for a fire to break out before it can obtain the fire engine, meaning that the UN does not have a standing military reserve. It has to wait for a resolution from the Security Council authorizing it to do so. So, similar to how the Articles of Confederation are weak because of their military, the UN is also weak because of that.
Thank you. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.